So I had streamed South of Midnight and stopped about 8 chapters into the game. After that, I caught the end of Synthetic Man's stream, and after I saw the ending to the game, I decided I wasn't going to finish streaming it myself. The game wasn't even the good kind of a bad game where you just laugh at how cringe it is. Something like Forspoken, for instance. No, this is more the Flintlock kind of bad. It was just boring through and through. The worst kind of bad. The movie game portions were far too frequent, and the combat was frustrating and tedious. At some point I realized your dodge ability has a short half-second input delay, which might as well be its own cooldown, and that does not bode well in a game where several enemies can launch attacks at you simultaneously and in rapid succession. Also, none of the puzzles in the game were real puzzles either. They all just amounted to activate this thing and jump onto it, and that was it. Also, I purposely deactivated the waypoint generator that tells you where to go, specifically because I wanted to give myself more freedom to explore and figure things out, without having the game hold my hand. Unfortunately, the game is full of white paint colorations on various objects that indicate where you can climb and where you can't. Anything unpainted is impassable. There are also invisible walls everywhere, and that just makes one feel incredibly boxed in all the time. And when I started up the game, it gave you all these accessibility options out the wazoo, which is incredibly ironic given the game maximally limits your ability to deviate from a linear path. I would call the game's story emotionally manipulative if it didn't try to do that so obviously. Every segment where you listen to Hazel's mother talk about herself is just straight up flashback exposition. The mother's just speaking aloud at nobody in general. Meanwhile, Hazel says the most generic things ever in response. The story's messaging makes it absurdly obvious how you're supposed to feel about every single interaction in the game. All based on Hazel's monologue. You're not supposed to think for yourself at all. The game just spells it out for you. And of course, the underlying theme or meaning of the game is dealing with trauma. All this trauma over and over again. Women love trauma.
It's a shifting. All you're trying to do right now is shift responsibility of agency by trying to do the trauma dump.
The idea is all on her.
Okay,
no one else.
Can I respond real quick and then I'll let you respond, I promise. Okay. So the idea here is just that all you're trying to do is ascribe motivation, which you don't even know. Like, for instance, you actually don't even know that this is true. The reason you suppose it, and the feminists have taught this and drilled this into women along with psychological voodoo, you seem to assume that unless there was some corrupting agent in the angelic nature of the woman, that she was going to be a sweet halo-having angel. But then the evil man came and corrupted her somehow through, some sort of deviancy or other things. Couldn't the very simple answer here be just that she doesn't care and wants to make a lot of money and is just a bad person? Couldn't that also be the answer?
I feel like something probably happened to this girl.
Yeah, see, it's just shifting.
When she was No, I'm not removing her agency.
Why is it always got to be trauma related?
No.
And of course, when women deal with trauma, they lash out and sometimes they kill someone. Like the farmer who raised that vicious gator, well, he was eventually killed by his wife. It was a necessary evil, I'm sure. Also, the grandmother, the antagonist of the game, she neglects her daughter, and the daughter ends up falling into a pond and drowning. And rather than any of these women being held accountable for their actions, they are sympathized with, of course. This perpetuates a message that human beings, or women in particular, are just born into this world, perfect little angels, and then some trauma happens and ruins their lives. So it's all external. If these outside trauma forces didn't exist, then these women would have just lived out their lives in peace and harmony. There isn't a single point in the game where Hazel experiences any growth of character or learns some valuable lesson based on any mistakes she makes along the way of her journey. Now, the encounter with Molly, the giant spider woman, had the potential for something interesting with regard to all the children she is kidnapping, but the boss fight is entirely forced and based on a misunderstanding that one can see coming a mile away. And I get it. Hazel is young, she's naive, but the game does not even commit to sticking Molly's death to the rashness of Hazel's actions. Molly dies in large part due to the fact that Hazel was deceived and taken advantage of, but whatever, the game just moves on from there. This adds to the theme I mentioned earlier, and so one could argue that Hazel doesn't need to take accountability. It was trauma that led her to making that decision. She was being irrational, sure, but she was also just protecting her mother, and the grandmother was deceiving her. But you know, her grandmother only did that because she was trying to save her daughter. You see, everybody has a reason for why they're doing what they're doing, and it's all motivated by goodwill. And this is a problem overall with how stories today write villains. Particularly female villains, but you could also extend this to Atreus killing Thor's sons in God of War 2018. Atreus is never punished for his actions. If you have no concept of evil or original sin, then people just become wholly motivated by something from the outside, and they are never held accountable for that. It's never something internal like one's own vices or pride or a general desire to see the world burn. Now, of course, what woke elements did I notice in the game? Aside from noticing a game about a black girl from Louisiana was obliged to make references to slavery, one of the fleeing slave ghosts was pregnant too. Wow. White people sure are evil, aren't they? The game's primary antagonist is a white woman. Because she is a woman, however, the writers were sure to make her a sympathetic antagonist, of course. I also saw some parallels between this game and Dustborn, where the main character has an ability which can alter and fix reality somehow. I'm not sure what this is. Is this the black woman's burden? The game's antagonist, the grandmother, also had a journal talking about how she doesn't trust the science and she was going to use the weave to establish behavioral control and somehow reduce crime. And while this could be another attempt to make the antagonist sympathetic, I also read it as working into a narrative about how white people try to control society through their evil, racist magic, which they stole, of course. But only black people, black women to be more specific, can wield this magic the correct way and bring balance to the universe. Also, the game had this "we was Kangs" kind of moment. As the game progresses, you see Hazel's clothing and hairstyle change. She gets these hoop earrings, a top knot, and several tattoos. An African beauty indeed, yes, but only by those standards that have been set down by our mythological Wakandan paradise. The way I read this is that the closer she got in touch with her magic powers, the more African she looked, as in the tribal peoples throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, not savage enough to deter a white audience. And honestly, the part of the game that was most woke for me was that there are no prominent male characters to be found. And no, the catfish doesn't count. All of the men in the game are some degree of evil, useless, or just not present. Hazel's given no romantic interest either, and her father, who also happens to be a white dude, is only mentioned in passing a couple of times. The game predominantly involves women. Lastly, I should add that it is no surprise to me that the game is like this. After all, this is a Sweet Baby Inc. creation, which means, just as Kim Belair intended,
I often talk about the fact that video games are such huge projects, right? And they feel like they're these huge works of creative brilliance and they take so many brains, but for me, I would much rather work on something that is an okay project with great people who I care about, who lift each other up, who provide a sense of balance, than something that is, maybe technically very proficient, but it was hell to make and the people aren't empathetic.